Welcome to the Jacob's Ladder podcast, where we talk about loving God, loving others, and loving ourselves at work and at home. Today is a pondering or triple P episode where I share some of my thoughts that I hope will be purposeful and meaningful for you, and I combine it with praise for our Creator. Hello and welcome to Jacob's Ladder episode 234, which is a triple P episode 116. And I would like to talk about a book written by David Bahnsen called Fulltime and some of the lessons from it around how to correctly think of our work. So this is going to be very much in line with what we've traditionally done in the past with the Christian Men at Work podcast. And interestingly, I'm going to kind of compare it to the movie Click with Adam Sandler. And I'm going to throw out some possible ways that we should think about our work. So I was contacted by an agent for David Bahnsen to do an interview for his book Fulltime, Work and the Meaning of Life. And I took way too long to read it and get back to them, and they were no longer doing interviews. So I was bummed about that because I have a lot of respect for David Bahnsen. He does the economic report for one of my favorite podcasts, which is called The World and Everything in It, and a segment they call The Money Beat. Just a really sharp guy. And I really enjoyed his book. And so since I wasn't able to do that interview, I thought the next best thing was I was going to use his book to lead a teaching at my church, which I did this past weekend. And that led to a lot of good discussion. And then I saw the movie Click with Adam Sandler this weekend as well. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but basically Adam Sandler is struggling with his life, and then he comes across this, you could say, supernatural or magical remote, which the ultimate universal remote that allows him to basically manipulate his life. He can fast forward through things he doesn't want to deal with. He can mute people and things that he doesn't want to listen to. And it's a comedy, but it touches on some real serious issues. And spoiler alert, which maybe I've already spoiled it if you haven't seen it, but kind of the big takeaway is a lesson that I've seen in movies often. In fact, I think you could argue this was the theme of the movie I commented on with Tom Hanks recently called Here. But I would say maybe the takeaway lesson from the movie Click is put family before work, or you'll miss out on the most important things in life. And the reason it struck me so much was because that is really, in some ways, not the opposite, but it's that thinking that really I think David Bahnsen was trying to counter in his book. And I don't want to speak for David, but I am going to share with you the takeaways I took from his book. So in his book, he talks about the fact that I think he quoted Arthur Brooks as someone who had stated that there are 4 key ingredients to a happy and fulfilling adult life with meaning, and that is faith, family, friends, and work. And he goes on to give a lot of statistics to show, first of all, that we're not a happy society. We don't have a fulfilling adult life for the most part, as evidenced by the number of people on antidepressants and other statistics. And then he goes on to talk about how we're not doing well in terms of faith, we're not doing well in terms of family, and we're not doing well in terms of friendship. One of the stats around friendship was that from 1990, 3% of those surveyed said that they had no close friends, and that has quadrupled today to now 12% of our population, over 1 in 10, say they have no close friends, zero close friends. And then he comments that even though we're not doing well in those three areas, most people, if asked, would agree that each of those three ingredients of life are valuable, and that if we had more of them, we would be happier individuals: faith, family, and friends. And then he compares that to work, because often the general commentary about our work, both in the society at large as well as within the Christian community, is that work is more the problem than the solution when it comes to a meaningful and happy life. And inevitably, the phrase that comes up most often is work-life balance, that we need to have a better work-life balance, which basically means more life, less work, as if work was not part of life. And one of the reasons I really liked this book is because that had was similar to some of the main points I made in my book that I wrote back in 2014, Jesus is at Work. And at the end of the day, we spend all of these hours at work. For us to think of it as a necessary evil or something we just have to do in order to make money, in order to do what we really were here on this earth to do, which is whatever we do outside of work, just doesn't make sense to me. And then he went on to make a strong economic argument for why there should be more people working, and also showed how we have fewer people working than ever before, even versus the Great Depression. And that's true of all age groups. And then he takes us back to Genesis and shows how we are co-creators and made in God's image. And in the first 6 days of creation, God said everything else he made was good, but when he made mankind, it was very good. And you could argue it was because of our capacity to work in a way that the rest of creation does not have that capacity. And we are co-creators with God in the sense that God made work out of nothing, whereas we extract potential from creation, but we do that in a way that's similar to our Father. And that's the mandate that he's given us. That's the mandate he gave to Adam and Eve, and he gives to us today. So all of that paints a much different picture of work than let me give you another gem from the book. The word avodah in Hebrew, which I really was intrigued by that because I've been studying Hebrew, occurs 400 times in the Bible, and it is translated as work, service, and worship. So one word means the same thing depending on context and how you translate it. So you could argue that that's God's way of saying is that we can serve and worship by our work. But let's get back to, and then he also talks about so many of the parables of Yeshua involved work, and there was just so much in that book. I highly recommend you get this book. It's excellent. But in that discussion that I led at my church, boy, there was some somewhat heated discussion there. And some of the opinions that came out of that discussion are things I've heard before, that, we need to have a certain occupation in order to have meaning in life. We need to be a pastor, a missionary, a nurse, a fireman, something that is deemed to truly be service in order to have a meaningful life. Everything else is just necessary evil, pays the bills. Maybe it's good for tithing at your church, but otherwise try to do as little of it as you have to. The other commentary I heard was that you should do what you love, not just what will make you money. And I don't disagree with that, but I don't think it's the whole story. I think that and I've been thinking about this. I've been chewing on this because I've been talking about this in this podcast and thinking about this for a long time. And so it's really refreshing to get some new ideas on this. And like a lot of things, as I've said before in life, I think the answer comes in a balance of different ideas that each have value. And I think that's true in this case. So I believe that we're probably being more in line with God's will for our lives when we're pursuing the things that He gave us talents for and abilities and passion and interests. But I don't think that's always true. There's examples where God chose people to do things that they weren't highly skilled to do, like David, and what's the other one I was thinking of? Gideon, I think. Where they didn't have the natural abilities, or Moses couldn't even speak well. He chose people who didn't have the natural abilities, and through that he was given more glory. So it's not always as simple as, well, do what you're really good at or do what you're passionate about. But there's some truth to that. And I also think that the ingredient that is so critical is how we think about our work. And that's the part that I think David Bahnsen really hit the nail on the head. And the part that we're missing so much in the Christian church when we talk about this topic. First of all, we don't talk about it very much. But when we do talk about it, it's usually in the context of, don't let work be an idol. Don't, and I've also heard it talk about prioritizing our lives, where Christ should be first, then our marriage, then our children, then our community, and then our career as last. And I used to agree with that, and I know the intent behind that. And I'm not saying there isn't truth in thinking that way, where you're prioritizing your life in that way. But I think you're also missing the mark with that. I think that God should be the center of our lives, and everything should emanate out of that. And I like that better than the idea of, okay, this is first, this is second, this is third. And because if that's true, then how do you justify spending half of your waking hours at your job if it's the fifth thing on your list? It just doesn't make sense. With all due respect to those that have taught that and that have shared that with me in the past. So I just think that this is a really important. I'm going to continue to be passionate about this topic of work, even though I've specifically chosen to rebrand this podcast to Jacob's Ladder with a shift in focus just from talking about work to talking about loving God, loving others, and loving ourselves at work and at home. And I am going to continue with that as the primary focus, but I wanted to keep that at work and at home in kind of the mission statement of this new focus of this podcast, because it is and continues to be important to me as an issue, and I just think it is an important issue that we all should think about, because work was there from the beginning. When God created, he worked for 6 days and he rested and established the Sabbath as the weekly Sabbath as the most important Sabbath for us to honor and observe and to remember. And there's all sorts of lessons in that, including trusting God and knowing to rest and focusing on Him on a cyclical basis. But there's also a lesson in the proportion of the creation week. 6 days you work, 1 day you don't work. And that He gave Adam and all mankind a mandate to grow, to take dominion over the earth. And that basically is work. And so it's a big deal, and I don't want my work ever again to be relegated to the secular and not the sacred. I think it is sacred. One of the things David Bahnsen talked about was the false beliefs of Gnosticism, which basically says that the spiritual things are greater than the material. And in some ways, Jesus coming to earth, as both God and man, I think goes against that idea in Gnosticism, that we are both flesh and spirit. And so any aspect of our life that we just relegate to the unimportant or material and that it has no spiritual significance, including our work, I think is a mistake. And it's a way to escape our relationship with God, because if we spend any part of our life, especially 8 or more hours a day, thinking, well, this is just has nothing to do with God, has nothing to do with my relationship with God, it's just a way something I got to do to pay the bills. That is just a field day, I believe, for Satan to take over a good portion of our lives and our thinking and our priorities. And I just don't agree with that. So there's more that we can say about that, but I think that's probably a good summary of just what I'm thinking and feeling right now on the topic. I hope you've gotten some benefit from this. I love you guys. I hope you enjoyed this Triple P episode as much as I did. I also hope you're feeling inspired to apply something you heard to better love God, love others, and or love yourself. You can find notes from this episode as well as more resources at jacobsladderpodcast.org. Until next time, shalom and God bless.